The summons came not from William, but from William's doctor. The email was sent to Harry's most secure personal address, the one he'd had since Afghanistan, known only to a handful of people. The subject line was blank. The body contained 3 words: "It's the King. Windsor. Now." The "it" was not an event, but a condition. Familial amyloid polyneuropathy, FAP, a rare, hereditary, and aggressively degenerative disease that attacks the nervous system. It is passed dominantly. If a parent has it, a child has a 50% chance. The King had it. His grandfather had died of it, obscured in the medical bulletins as complications of old age. Harry landed at RAF Northolt in a cold, clinical panic. He was not thinking of thrones or titles. He was thinking of his father's hands, which had begun a slight, intermittent tremor 2 years ago, dismissed as fatigue. He was thinking of the slur that had crept into one public speech, blamed on a dental procedure. He was thinking of his own blood, and his brother's, and his children's. He was taken not to a palace, but to the King's private suite at the King Edward VII Hospital. The room smelled of antiseptic and expensive linen. William stood by the window, his back to the door, silhouetted against the gray London sky. He did not turn. "He's asleep," William said, his voice flat, stripped of all its usual polished resonance. "The neurologist from Zurich just left. The progression is textbook. In 5 years, he'll likely be wheelchair-bound. His cognitive faculties may remain, but his ability to govern, to be seen, will erode. Then it will end." Harry stood frozen, the weight of the words like physical sandbags on his chest. "And us?" he finally whispered. William turned. His face was haggard, etched with a responsibility that had just turned from burdensome to horrific. "We've been tested. I have the gene." He let the sentence hang, a death sentence and a life sentence woven into one. The world tilted. William, the heir, the future king, carried the ticking time bomb in his DNA. Harry's mind raced through the implications, the brutal genetics of monarchy. The disease could manifest at any time. William could be king for a decade, or a year, before his own body betrayed the crown. "I'm negative," Harry said, the words feeling like a betrayal as he spoke them. "I know," William replied, no relief in his voice, only a deeper, more profound exhaustion. "They tested you from a sample taken during your last military physical. They've known for 18 months. They had known. The institution had known that the heir was potentially compromised and the spare was clean, all while Harry was in California, giving interviews about his trauma. The greatest duty of the spare, to be the healthy, viable backup, had become a biological fact, and he had been the last to know. "That's why you're here," William said, stepping closer. "Not because of her lawsuits, or your taxes, or your bloody podcasts. This is why. The Shorefoot Agreement, the reconciliation, the staged homecoming, it was all contingency planning. They were moving the clean spare into position because the heir is carrying a flaw that could shatter the monarchy at any moment." Harry felt the foundations of his reality crumble. His entire rebellion, his great escape, his narrative of liberation, it had all been happening while the palace's geneticists and constitutional lawyers were watching his brother's DNA with dread and quietly repositioning him as the ultimate insurance policy. His return wasn't a choice. It was a demographic imperative. "What do you need from me?" Harry asked Theold. Ingrained language of duty surfacing through the shock. "I need you to be what you were always born to be," William said, his eyes holding Harry's with an intensity stripped of all past resentment. "The backup. Not in 5 years. Now. You will move into an office at Kensington Palace. You will begin a shadow training, constitutional law, state papers, the real work. Not as special envoy, but as counselor of state-in-waiting. You will be visible, capable, and ready. Because the day my hands start to shake or my speech slurs in public, the transition will have to begin immediately. The world cannot see a king deteriorate. They must see a capable brother, seamlessly assuming the duties. The spare's final duty, Harry, is not to replace me after I'm gone. It's to be me, before I am seen to fail. The final duty. It wasn't about stepping in after a tragedy. It was about being the public face of the monarchy while the rightful heir sickened in private. Harry would have to learn to be king in all but name, to project the strength and stability William might soon be unable to, all while pretending nothing was wrong. He would have to bury his own life, his own identity, to become his brother's healthy body double for the nation. He had returned, believing he was negotiating a financial and personal settlement. He now understood he was reporting for a biological post. The spare was finally, irrevocably, on duty. And the Kala papers had been written in his own DNA. The shadow training was the most profound betrayal of self Harry had ever experienced. It was conducted in a secure, book-lined study in the bowels of Kensington Palace, known only as the Repository. His tutor was Sir Oliver Penton, a former cabinet secretary and the coldest, most brilliant constitutional mind of his generation. Penton did not teach Harry to be a king. He taught him to be William. Phase 1, Vocal and Physical Replication. A voice coach worked with Harry for 3 hours a day. The goal was not to mimic William's voice, but to neutralize Harry's own. To eliminate the Californian upward inflection, the casual emotive tone. They drilled him in William's slower, more deliberate cadence, his flatter vowels, the palatal plosive he used for emphasis. A movement coach corrected his posture, pulling his shoulders back from their relaxed, athletic set into William's more rigid, upright stance. They practiced William's signature gestures, the two-handed wave, the specific way he put a hand in his pocket during a walkabout. Harry was learning to perform his brother's humanity. Phase 2, Constitutional Osmosis. Penton's method was ruthless. He did not give Harry books. He gave him the red boxes, the actual, current daily dispatch of state papers prepared for the Prince of Wales. Memos from the Prime Minister, intelligence briefings on Ukraine, treasury forecasts. Read them, Penton would say, understand them. Then I will tell you what William thinks about them. Harry would spend nights dissecting complex trade agreements, only to be told the next morning, the Prince of Wales's position, which you will hold it fast, is that the agricultural tariffs are a concern for rural communities, but the broader strategic alliance is paramount. No further detail, never more detail than that. He was learning William's mind, cautious, diplomatic, and strategically shallow. Depth was a liability. Consistency was everything. Phase 3, the Psychological Gauntlet. The most brutal sessions were with the palace psychiatrist Dr. Anya Voss. Her job was not to care for Harry's well-being, but to stress-test his performance. She would ambush him during his studies. "Prince Harry," she'd say, her voice calm. "The Prime Minister is on the phone. The Sunday Times is about to run a story alleging King Charles is suffering from a degenerative illness. They have a source at the Zurich clinic. What is your response, as the Prince of Wales?" Harry's heart would hammer. "I would deny it unequivocally. Call it reckless speculation." "Wrong," Voss would snap. The Prince of Wales would say, "The king is in excellent spirits and focused on his duties. We do not comment on private medical matters, and neither should any reputable newspaper." Then he would hang up and immediately call the editor of the Times to discuss the duchy's advertising spend. "You must not deny, you must dismiss, and then punish. You are not protecting your father. You are protecting the institution from a market fluctuation." He was being hollowed out. Every instinct forged in the military directness, action, transparency was being systematically excised and replaced with the calculated, passive-aggressive protocols of sovereign survivability. His love for his brother curdled into a horrific, intimate understanding of William's prison. To be the heir was to be a living, breathing corporate policy. William himself was a ghost in this process. They met weekly for a strictly scheduled brothers' lunch. The conversations were cordial, superficial. William asked after the children. Harry asked after Catherine. They discussed the weather, a recent football match, the unspoken truth of the training, the disease, hung between them like a thick pane of unbreakable glass. They were no longer rivals or even brothers. They were components in a succession protocol. One was the primary system, the other was the hot swappable backup being prepped for immediate installation. Harry's old life in Montecito faded into a surreal dream. Meghan's calls, once a lifeline, now felt like intrusions from a different universe. He couldn't explain the horror of his days, the profound violation of becoming a copy of his own sibling. He offered only vague platitudes about complicated duties. The distance didn't grow. It became an abyss, excavated by the silent, grim machinery of genetic destiny. He was no longer Harry. He was the viable vessel. His final duty was to erase himself so completely that if the day came, the public would see not a spare stepping up, but a seamless, uninterrupted continuation of Prince William. The shadow was learning to consume the man. and the man was beginning to forget what sunlight felt like. The duty manifested not with a crown, but with a single, almost imperceptible tremor. It happened during the Trooping the Color ceremony. William, on the Buckingham Palace balcony, was performing his flawless, practiced role. As a six-horse carriage passed below, a ripple of excitement went through the crowd. William, following protocol, raised his right hand in a steady, regal wave. For 3 perfect seconds, he held it. Then, as he began to lower his arm, a fine, high-frequency shudder raced from his shoulder to his fingertips. It lasted less than a second. To the billion people watching worldwide, it was nothing a trick of the light, a breeze on the uniform. To Harry, standing 2 paces behind in the shadow of the balcony door, trained to see nothing else. It was a thunderclap. The primary system had just glitched. The diagnosis was no longer a private horror. It was a public countdown that had just begun its final silent phase. The tremor was the first visible crack in the sovereign facade. There would be more. That evening in the repository, Sir Oliver Penton did not mention the tremor. He simply slid a new stack of red boxes across the table. They were thicker. They concerned the Golden Jubilee Planning Committee events 5 years in the future. William's long-term schedule was being quietly reallocated, his future appearances being hedged with vague, flexible phrasing. Harry's own schedule, however, solidified. His shadow tours were promoted to the front page of the court circular. His speeches were granted more prominence. The transition was no longer theoretical. It was logistical. Harry understood his final duty now. It was not to reign. It was to provide continuity in the event of a catastrophic slow-motion abdication. He was to be the public face of stability while his brother underwent a private, medical downfall. He would inherit the throne not from a grave but from a sickbed after a long invisible transfer of power. He went to see his father. The king was in a wheelchair by the window, a rug over his knees. His mind was sharp, but his voice was a fragile thread. "You see it now," Charles said, not looking at him, his gaze on the palace gardens. "The duty of the spare. It was never to live a free life. It was to wait in the wings, fully dressed for the part, in case the lead actor fell ill. I am the lead actor who fell ill. William may be next, and you are the understudy who must never leave the theater." There was no anger. Only a devastating, institutional pity. Harry returned to his apartment at Kensington Palace. He looked at the photos on his dresser, himself in army fatigues, laughing with Meghan on their wedding day, cradling a newborn Archie. They felt like artifacts from a previous incarnation. The man in those pictures had believed in choice, in love, in escape. That man was gone. In his place was the spare, fully realized. His final duty was to stand in the wings, in the uniform of the heir, ready to walk on stage and deliver his brother's lines to a world that must never know the lead actor is losing his voice. He had not returned to William. He had been assimilated by the monarchy's immune system, the healthy cell deployed to surround and mask the failing one. His great rebellion had been the last, brief flaring of a self before it was extinguished by the oldest duty of all, the biological imperative of the crown.